Now let's begin the educational session. I'm so pleased to introduce you to Anne Max, Elaine Cohn, and Gershon Willinger. Anne Max graduated with her MSW in 1985 and has worked at Baycrest since 1998. She's had many different jobs at Baycrest, working with inpatients as well as with outpatient teams, assisting people who live in the community. In 2006, Anne co-founded a program for Holocaust survivors called Cafe Europa, which is a social program. Cafe Europa also worked with Crestwood on the oral history projects, where some of the students interviewed survivors and learned about their experiences during the Holocaust. Anne's current role is Holocaust Program Coordinator, and she works with Holocaust survivors and their families. This includes providing virtual programs, a support group for second generation, one-on-one virtual counseling, phone calls with survivors, and in-person visits with residents at Baycrest. Elaine Cohn is a retired social worker. She is a child of Holocaust survivors and has always been interested in talking with other children of survivors. Educating people about the impact of the Holocaust, especially during the rise of anti-Semitism, is important to Elaine. Gershon Willinger was born in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, in 1942, and he is one of the youngest child survivors, going through 3 concentration camps in his young life. His parents were German Jews who fled to Holland 1943 and were murdered in the extermination camp in Sobibor, Poland. After being in various foster homes and institutions, Gershon was permanently placed in 1950 with a Jewish family in Holland and immigrated to Israel in 1960. He joined the Israeli army and served as a paratrooper. In later years, Gershon returned to the army as a professional mental health officer for troops. Gershon studied social work in Israel and spent all of his working life treating and helping abused children. Gershon is a speaker for Friends of the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Holocaust Center of Toronto. On a personal note, I know all of these wonderful people from when I worked at Baycrest, and I can let you know that you're in wonderful hands for this presentation today. So please join me in welcoming Anne, Elaine, and Gershon.
Thanks, Christina. And thank you for joining us today, everyone. I thought that I would start with the definition of anti-Semitism. So the one I'm going to use is the one adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And it goes as follows. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Unfortunately, Canada experienced another highly disturbing year for anti-Semitism in 2021. Nearly 8 anti-Semitic incidents occurred every day in Canada in 2021. The actual number of anti-Semitic incidents recorded in 2021 was 2,799. This marked the 4th successive year in which the over 2,000 plateau was exceeded. Toronto's Jewish community also experienced a significant increase in hate-motivated crimes and remains the most victimized group in 2020, as the city saw an unprecedented rise in hate crimes overall. According to the Toronto Police Service's annual hate crime statistical report, 63 of the 210 hate-motivated crimes reported in 2020 targeted the Jewish community, which is a 43% increase since 2019. In 2021, the Jewish community was also identified as the most targeted group of hate crimes. Baycrest, where I work, was started by an impoverished Jewish community that excluded Jewish people from working in many of the downtown hospitals. Baycrest has a history of helping other communities which also encountered racism to help model care homes for different populations. At Baycrest, we understand diversity and racism, and we're open to everyone. We provide Holocaust education and support, for example, to staff who start working at Baycrest so that they understand the special needs and triggers of Holocaust survivors. Baycrest has the largest survivor population in our nursing home, and I just wanted to briefly discuss some of the triggers that staff were educated about. And these can also be worse for some of our survivors, many of whom who have dementia, and their past memories are much more poignant. So for example, the idea of a shower. Many people in the death camps were sent to the showers and gassed. So for survivors, especially if they have dementia, staff are trained not to tell them they're going to the shower because they may have a flashback to that memory, but rather to tell them that they're taking them to get them clean. Another trigger is food. People were starving during the war, so many had to hoard food. And we see now, for example, when I used to run the Cafe Europa, for survivors, many would not leave with food left on their plates. Many people would wrap up their food and take it home with them. And for people in the nursing home, staff were, for example, told that they should leave a fresh roll or some piece of food in their room so that they're not worried about starving. Another trigger could be advanced planning and end-of-life directives. Many Holocaust survivors have been so intent on their survival that discussions about end-of-life directives and planning funerals, for example, are very painful and hard to discuss. So the staff are told and often try and discuss more with the children or other family members. It doesn't exclude talking to the survivors, but if there's a reaction or the resident or client is upset, they try not to continue the conversation. Death and dying is also something for survivors that can be very difficult, because very often we see that when survivors are dying, they're going back to their pre-war life and thinking about it was like for them and their families before the Holocaust and all the people in their family who they lost. The recent increase in anti-Semitism has created considerable stress for many Holocaust survivors and their children. And when I speak to survivors, this is a constant theme that I'm hearing. As a social worker, I provide individual and now since COVID especially, virtual counseling to survivors. So they're able to share their stories about what they experienced, their losses and grief, despite so many years since the war has ended. And as well, because of COVID, as we know, many people are more isolated in their homes. They're not going out. They're not seeing people. There's more time to think. And so I'm finding many survivors are also having flashbacks to what happened to them and reliving what they went through. This, of course, can be worse if they have dementia or are watching television and seeing people marching with swastikas, anti-Semitic graffiti, and recently children being separated from their children, put on buses, mass grave sites that I'm sure everyone unfortunately is seeing on the news. I also run a group for second generation. It's called the Second Generation Group. And this is where children of survivors can discuss issues that they are dealing with. One major issue my co-host and I are seeing is that anti-Semitism is triggering many children of survivors. For example, one lady shared that she now has a better understanding of what her parents experienced when the war started and during the Holocaust. Even though her father, for example, has now passed away, in some ways she feels closer to him now and more in touch with him than she did when he was alive. Being able to share these thoughts and concerns in a group setting is very helpful and comforting as people realize they are not alone and not overreacting. I thought it would be very helpful today to have both a child of survivors and a Holocaust survivor speak today and share their experiences and the impact of anti-Semitism on them. So first, I'd like to introduce Elaine Cohn, who's a child of Holocaust survivors.
Thank you, Anne. Hi, everybody. I am a child of Holocaust survivors. It's commonly referred to as second gen or second generation survivor. Why? Well, much has been written about the transmission of trauma, meaning survivors' personal experiences and feelings have been passed on to their children through their stories, their behavior, their style of parenting, the ways in which they socialize and engage in the community and the world at large, basically all aspects of life. This is transmitted overtly and or covertly. So I will only speak of my own personal experience as a second gen and how the rise of anti-Semitism impacts me. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings, and I will say that my siblings and I all see and cope with second gen issues differently. I've been married for 42 years to a second gen whose parents survived the horrors of concentration camps. My husband does not have any of the triggers that I have. If I didn't know better, I would never describe him as a second gen. My point is, there really is no formula. Our perceptions are all different, and consequently, so are all of our reactions. My mom survived the Holocaust with much of her large extended family intact, including her mother, my beloved grandmother, and her brothers. Their survival is mostly due to the unimaginable courage of their friends and neighbors, righteous Gentile families who risked their own lives and the lives of their children to save innocent Jewish people who were hunted, tortured, and murdered solely because they were Jewish. My father was the only survivor in his family. He was on the run for most of the Holocaust years in hiding. My parents met and married in a displaced persons camp in Germany after the war. My parents and grandmother spoke openly about their war experiences, although sometimes in quiet voices and in whispers and in languages we kids did not understand. Looking back at my childhood years, I recognize and truly appreciate how hard it was and how much strength and determination my parents had to create, provide, and live a relatively normal life, having recently survived an abnormal life. While at the same time, they were also able to fill our home with lots of love, laughter, and company. Truly amazing. Much has been written about dysfunction when discussing second gen. However, less is written about our positive attributes. Unlike many other second gen families who did not have grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, I did. I fortunately and gratefully did not experience the loneliness of holidays many second gen families experienced, with few relatives and constant reminders of those who perished in the Holocaust. I think the message I have always embodied from my parents is being aware that family is the absolute most important part of Jewish life. And this explains why, with the rise in anti-Semitism, I have become even more overprotective of my children and grandchildren. My kids range in age from 32 to 40, adults, all have children of their own. However, for me, the fear of the past and the increase in anti-Semitism has heightened and triggered memories of Holocaust stories and events my parents spoke of. I feel that my parents' experiences are what was and continues to be the biggest influence in my life. And as a result, the rise in anti-Semitism has directly contributed to feelings of trauma for me. There are definitely triggers. I have withdrawn sums of money from the bank in case my family and I have to flee. I ensure our passports are up to date. Same reason. I think about safe houses and where would we go if necessary? Who would hide us and risk their own lives and the lives of their families? When I enter a mall or movie theater pre-COVID, I look for emergency exits, always. My husband thinks it's ridiculous. I call it smart. At the same time, my parents have proved unbelievable resilience, and this resiliency is what gives me hope and determination for the future. I firmly believe educating others is the tool to combat all forms of racism and anti-Semitism for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Gershon, would you like to speak now?
Yes, I'm talking as a survivor who was very young and throughout his life had to validate his existence by finding out about his history. There are all kinds of Holocaust survivors, those who were born about 10 years or more before the war and led a very normal life with family, friends, and had a cultural life, a political life, a work life like anyone else. Because when we think about 6 million people, we usually think about the people who died, the people who were murdered. But all these people had lives before the war and were very active and very proud of who they were. I didn't have the fortunate occasion of meeting my parents. I was too young. I was born in 1942, and I was one of those unknown children who had to find out the rest of his life, and did so, who he was as a person. I was born in Holland, as you hear. Holland was a wonderful country before the war. It started already, the acceptance of Jews goes far back to the Inquisition in Spain. Jews came northward to Holland and they settled mostly in Amsterdam, but had no restrictions to live in any part of Holland. And so at the eve of the Second World War, when Holland was invaded and taken over by the German army and the Nazi regime within 5 days, the life of the Jews started to change. Holland is a very small country, and we had before the war 140,000 Jews in Holland, of which over 100,000 perished. I possess a book with all the names, 103,000 names of Jews, where they were born, where they were sent to, and the date they were murdered. That book is very dear to me. It's called In Memory or In Memoriam, because it also includes the name of my father, my mother, my grandparents, and the rest of the family. Now, you have to speak to many Holocaust survivors because each story is unique. Also, the second generations, it's the attitude of the person himself or herself, and also who they are as people. Now, myself, until the age of 8 years old, I spent my life in many places. I started off in Westerbork, which is a transit camp in Holland, where every Tuesday mornings the train was left for the east. I stayed there, and one can say, how come that they didn't take you as an infant of about 5 months? And I have to add to this, no memory of my parents, but the memory I have of my parents is that they must have been very courageous heroes, because an infant of about 4 or 5 months old, you shouldn't even have to deal with it. They were placing with the resistance in the hope that he would live. A parent is responsible for the welfare, to love this child, to educate this child, to nurture this child. And when they are willing to deny themselves to do so, that's something incredible. And they did that in the hope that I would stay alive. And the resistance, with the help of the righteous among the nations, is those good Christians who helped Jews to hide. I was taken from Amsterdam to the north of Holland to a town very close to the transit camp, where most of the town worked for the resistance. Unfortunately, I was betrayed. My name was given away. And the Dutch police, many of who collaborated with the Nazi regime, took me to this camp. And as I said before, the collaborators in Holland were very, very proud of their bureaucratic abilities. So I do have a paper trail in which I could research throughout my life where I came from, who I was, and later on met with people who really took care of me and back up my story as well. So I then said that I was taken to Westerbork. The righteous among the nations father, I shall call him, who hit me, was taken to prison, was able to talk himself out of it because it's a crime to hide Jews during the war. And I stayed in this camp until the 13th of September 1944, simply because I was there alone and my complete Jewishness was in question. That didn't mean that it saved your life, but it bought you more time. Because a Jew, as you must understand, was a commodity on the shelf in a warehouse. What that means is that you're there to be used, to be abused, and in the final analysis, to be annihilated. Finally, on the 30th of September 1944, I was taken with a group of 50 children, me included, to Bergen-Belsen, accompanied by 4 women between the ages of 16 and 25 who had to look after us. We stayed in Bergen-Belsen for a couple of months. We were there at the same time as Anna Frank was there as well, and her sister Margot. Unfortunately, Anna didn't survive the war because 2 weeks before the British liberation of that camp, she succumbed to typhus. Typhus was rampant in Bergen-Belsen. We were segregated as a group of 50 children because we were to be bartered with. So the regime wanted something instead, which meant that we were in a separate barrack and not so exposed to the disease that was rampant, to typhus. We stayed there a couple of months in that camp. And from there, as small children, we were transferred to Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. Terezin was the town, which was a very special camp. It was a model camp for the Nazi regime, where little boys and girls in white shirts, the new batches of children, I shall call them, arrived. They had to do gymnastics and they were then paraded. So as to show dignitaries what a wonderful camp this was. Of course it wasn't, although there was on the premises no gas chamber, but people left also daily, almost, to Auschwitz to be exterminated in Auschwitz. Now, I'd like to interject a moment because you need to know the definition of the Holocaust. Many things happen today, as with the Ukrainians and with people everywhere, the Yazidis, the Rohingyas, the Uyghurs, and I can go on. The question of the Jewish question during the war was that it was an intelligent, planned annihilation of the human psyche and then the human body over a long period of time, and not necessarily in one geographic over Europe, where Jews lived, adhered to the laws of that country, were involved with the culture of that country and in the politics of that country. But then what they had in common is that they were Jews, and what they were born into came to haunt them in Europe. The Nazi regime needed a lot of collaborators all over in every country in Europe, and they did receive that from many countries. Although I have to mention also there were very good people who were the righteous among the nations in Poland as well, also in the Ukraine, although very little, but those people need to be mentioned. But most people were very willing to give the name of the Jewish namers away when they were taken to the concentration camps. People don't like to talk about it. I ask my people, I tell people, if you were in a situation that you could save people and you knew to do the right thing, would you really do that when you know that it would endanger the life of your loved ones, of your family, and even your children? I don't want you to answer that question, but it's a question that I usually ask, because the righteous among the nations were very, very special people whose life was constantly in danger because a Jew was an Untermensch, was a non-person who had to be barely seen, not heard, and the rest, you know, of that story. So when we went to Theresienstadt, back to Theresienstadt, which was the model camp, much beauty came out of that camp. And I tell you what came out of that camp. Beautiful poems. Never saw another butterfly written. Beautiful, beautiful pictures that children drew. And I saw those pictures in Theresienstadt. Children tell the truth. They say usually children and old people tell the truth. And that's true because they expressed their feelings. They expressed who they were. And there were orchestras. There was a theater. Can you imagine to be in a theater, to be an actor, be a musician, and your number was up the following morning to be sent to the death camps? In that angst, in that environment, Jews lived. And I tell you this story because you probably, people who listen to me, you will probably think, yes, but today atrocities happen as well. Yes, they do happen. So then I come to a genocide. Genocides and what happens in Ukraine is terrible today, but genocides are usually spontaneous annihilation of people in mostly in one geographical area or a country over a short period of time. The Jewish question was solved by planning it at least for 10 years. Besides that, hatred against Judaism is about the oldest hatred in existence. However, with all that said, I'm very proud to be a Jew and very proud that I was born into the people that I was born into. That means that I am a Jew by birth. I'm a Holocaust survivor, I have that experience, but it doesn't take away that I'm proud of the person I am. This came to really haunt me the rest of my life, because when the war ended in 1945 and the Russian army or the Red Army liberated on the 8th of May 1945 Theresienstadt, what to do with all the small children, and I'm talking about myself, who couldn't defend themselves, talk for themselves, and decisions had to be made for them. So a smattering of a memory starts then when it was taken to Holland. And then in Holland, what started was the Little Holocaust. And the Little Holocaust is what to do with those little children. And I will make it short. For the next 5 years, from 1945 to 1950, had the most impact on the person I am today. Because I spent it in foster homes, I spent it in institutions, I spent it in convalescent homes and so forth, until finally in 1950, I was placed with a childless, broken Jewish couple who were also Holocaust survivors, but were childless, and took me in at the age of 8. They were courageous enough to take me in because I was labeled developmentally delayed because of large tonsils. And I remember at the age of 8, I had to learn to walk the stairs. I was also not toilet trained, and consequently, I was labeled as such. However, when I came to my foster parents, I suddenly had to find out who I was. I remembered that when I came back after the war to my wartime parents who were looking for me and finally found me, and I went back to their home for a while, I went to church with them. So my Judaism wasn't clear to me. Finally, when I was placed in the permanent foster home, did I find out that I was a Jew, which is a very abstract term for a young child, for an 8-year-old. However, what I was smart enough to understand is that if you're a Jew, that's something you are, it's within you, and it's not taken away from you, because everything has been taken away from you, all the people you stayed with and all the things you did. So consequently, I took to Judaism. And I lived in Holland until I was 18 years old as a refugee. because my parents came from Germany and they weren't naturalized. So I was again in the on the periphery of society. But finally, my foster parents, when I was 17-year-old, adopted me and I could get a Dutch nationality. And I used that Dutch nationality to get out of Holland. Although I have a lot to thank my foster parents for, because not many of us children were able to get psychiatric treatment. I had psychiatric treatment from age of 8 until 13, and then again from 15 to 17. I was very privileged because it set me more or less on the straight and narrow. Of course, later in life, I had to also prove that no, I'm not a developmentally challenged, or I had to go to, however, I had to go to special schools. I went to university where I obtained a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. And it was not only because I was interested in social work, it was also to prove to myself, you're a whole person and you can make lots of contributions to society. I left Europe at 18, the country who I blamed, which I shouldn't have probably, for not looking after my parents, for making me parentless, for not looking after me. In Holland, 87% of this lovely picturesque country with cobblestones and windmills, 87% were either collaborators or good people who did nothing. And that is really we have to always, with pride, mention the righteous among the nations, the good Christians, and the resistance who helped Jews and other people who did the right thing. And that's really what I'm very thankful for. Yes, I did go into the Israeli army because I was accepted immediately, and I knew what I was fighting for who I was as an individual. So coming to Canada was purely economical, because that is still, with the country which was proclaimed the State of Israel in 1948, I still have the security of a homeland. And as it was mentioned by Elaine before, my bags are always packed. When I sit in a restaurant, I sit with my back to the wall. And when I'm always so afraid that my belongings aren't with me. I need always, when I go somewhere or I'm in a hospital, I need my belongings underneath my bed because I'm afraid that people are going to take it away from me, which is ridiculous so many years, but you can analyze that, of course, after the war. We have our hang-ups. My children, who are really second generation, I have always opened up to them. But I always, because we always live in hope, I always wanted to live and to build a life for myself. And a pity I could never stand. So I always wanted to continue. But finally, at the age of 50, I had a proper breakdown. And then everything came out of the woodwork. So when I tell you this story now, while I'm sitting across from you, is therapeutic. It is also something that I need to do. Also something that's my duty because of all the Holocaust deniers that are here around us. Also with the amount of anti-Semitism that I mentioned that is going up in this world. And the only thing that my children noticed always, especially when we were sitting at a dinner table, they always used to say, "Papa, come back to us, you're away, you're not with us at the table." Because my mind is wandering and still wanders, although a lot less at 80 than it did at 40 and 50, I am able to concentrate better now on who is in front of me. But that's because somewhere it's as if it becomes part of your DNA. It is within my system to be a Holocaust survivor, not because I feel that I'm so different from other people, but I feel that I'm still quite, you don't get over it. It's always part of your life, although it doesn't identify me as a Jew. I studied social work because it's give back to society, because as a child, other people had always to help me with my decisions. So if I speak a little bit garbled, excuse me, because although you don't understand me, but English is definitely a second language. I learned to speak it properly by marrying my wife. I'm very thankful to that because she's from Britain originally and born after the war, but she has become a Holocaust survivor by proxy. So consequently, I can continue and continue, but I try to just give you a glimpse into the life of a very young child survivor who had to search for his identity throughout his life, who is very lucky that he was able to have a paper trail and could go to Germany and could go to Israel and could go to Holland to look through archives and find out. So the negative of the bureaucratic pride that people had stood me in good stead, because I consequently could find out who I am as a person and live in front of you. I usually mention current issues, but what we don't mention, and although I speak about myself, 500,000 Roma and Sinti were murdered. Homosexuals, lesbians, and gays were murdered. Communists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and developmentally delayed people, started by the German youth and adults in mobile units, where they were gassed to find out if the annihilation on a grand scale could occur in Nazi Germany and in Poland, where the German concentration camps were established as well. So consequently, it's atrocious, but nobody was free of discrimination. The largest number and the largest preparation for the death of a people was the Jews, because, again, I told you, that was many, many, many years before the war when this was all organized. So I have given you a little bit. I live in hope. My children are one. I have 3 children. I have 7 grandchildren. I have been married for over 50 years. And every time I look at a picture on my wall of my family, I say, this is a war that Hitler definitely did not win. And I'm very proud of that. So I still have hope. I still believe that there are more good people than bad people in this world. But the message I always leave people is, don't be a person or a good person who stands by, because good people who stand by are useless. Make your voices heard. That's all I'm saying. Not only with me, but also with the Ukrainians, with the Yazidis, with the Uyghurs in the reprogramming camps, with the Rohingyas who are languishing on the border of Myanmar and Bangladesh, who nobody speaks about in Africa, where child soldiers and people are annihilated. And the list is long and could go on. And I apologize for those that I didn't mention. So this is the end of my story. I hope I have given you a glimpse in the life of one Holocaust survivor, but you should listen to many Holocaust survivors, and you have still the privilege to do so because they're still alive. Most have passed away, and listen to all those people who are able to escape to a free country as Canada, who have their story to tell to you as well. I won't talk about the First Nations and the child and the unmarked graves that we have to atone for a lot in this country as well. But the list goes on and on. So I hope I've touched a little bit upon my concerns to make it a better world. And I thank you for listening to me.
Gershon, thank you so much. That was so powerful and moving.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Really. Christine, I don't know if you need her asking for questions now, or if anyone has any comments, or I'll leave that to you.
I certainly am, Anne, and thank you for that. And thank you, Gershon, and thank you, Elaine, for sharing your stories with us. There have been a lot of comments coming in during all of your presentations, and people feel just the generosity of your sharing of your stories, and they feel very moved and very touched by your stories. And so thank you for that. And I know right now I feel very full of heart as well. And especially explaining, what you have gone through in your life, Gershon, and to still be so filled with so much hope and so much positivity. It's beyond touching. So thank you for sharing that. And I have asked for some questions, and while they're coming in, I was thinking, and of course, looking at the topic of our presentation today, and the rise of anti-Semitism, and wondering, some thoughts from all of you, for the people who are watching today, social workers and social service workers. What are thought processes that you might be able to share with how they might be able to support their clients who might be experiencing some really challenging traumatic feelings, just turning on the news these days, or understanding what is happening. And so some thought processes for how our members might be able to support their clients and those who they work with who might be experiencing some trauma and some negative repercussions because of the rise of anti-Semitism.
Well,
if I could, just my opinion, I think giving people the opportunity to share their story and their feelings in a safe place, because certainly as survivors are aging, and I think they begin to take an inventory of their life, allowing them the opportunity to talk really openly and honestly about their feelings, and just ensuring that they feel safe to do it. And I think that's probably where you come in, Anne, because you work a lot with survivor families as well, right?
Yeah, and obviously you can't change what's going on, but I find if people are able to talk about it, just like you said, Elaine, they do have a bit of comfort. And I also run a group for child survivors, and we've had a couple of people speak who have written books about their trauma. And just as a group, people talking about it has been very helpful as well. So I think, being able to talk in a safe environment, whether it's one-on-one or in a group with people who have shared experiences, is very helpful.
I think also for some survivors who have never openly discussed their experiences with their families, their children, and that's not unusual for people not to discuss it for a variety of reasons. And I think if given an opportunity to discuss it and share it, end of life is really important.
It's also very important, as you said, Elaine, to be in a safe environment to be listened to, but also to show an enormous amount of empathy, because it's also a matter of trust. You are a social worker, you sit in front of these people. Can they trust you? It's not just one meeting. You need more meetings. They need to see you. They need the empathy. And if you shed a tear in front of your client, that's very acceptable, because some people are in enormous pain. It took them a lot of courage to talk. And also, especially children. We see children who they look modern, today's children, but the traumatic experiences that are on their minds, before they can share that, mistrusting. We have to gain and earn their trust. So it is not, oh, well, I'm giving you a nice little interview, I'm going to talk to you face to face. You have to show empathy. So the room you sit in, the way you sit with that person, they're not just, it's not just, oh, well, in an interview room, you have to give the comfort where it is necessary as well. You have to be really a feeling person and give all the empathy that you can give to that person. Because I did get that as a child as well. Not often, but later in life, I did get that, and it helps enormously.
And I think I agreed, Gershon, and also building a relationship with the people you talk to. So like for example, it's sort of ongoing, where there's people I speak to. It's not just a one-off discussion. I must say, wearing a mask sometimes hides the tears I show. If there's anything positive about wearing a mask, people don't see my tears as often. But on a serious side, developing a rapport with them and enabling them to feel safe, that they can trust talking to me or whoever they're talking to.
And talk as an equal. For some social workers, and I don't step on people's toes, I hope, but you have to talk as an equal. You have to always talk face to face, not as a superior who's employed. And that sometimes is very hard. But if you're a good social worker, you're able to do that.
That was beautiful. Thank you all for commenting. And I have to say, through the chat right now, there's a lot of people who are saying that they have similar life histories or similar family histories. And so hearing your stories really reverberates with them. And one person commenting as well that their Opa was part of the Dutch resistance, and that they're, very proud to hear him mentioned, or, him represented in our talk today as well. Question that we
just a minute. Yeah, just to say, just for your own interest, to my grandchildren, we are Oma and Opa as well.
That's lovely. Well, we did have a question as well, Gershon, that, you're about 3 when the war started, I believe. Is that right?
Ended.
It ended, pardon me, right. And people are curious, how have you been able to keep up such hope and resilience? What is your secret?
To hope and resilience, because my hobby is people, which helps. There is your background, who you are as a person. It's how you live with it and part of your DNA. So I have always been interested. I have hope because in a time that I couldn't make decisions for myself and I needed psychiatric help, people were there for me. So from one part after the war, I knew that there were always people who were willing to help you. There were the anti-Semites as well after the war, because it's not only of today. When I came back to Holland and I started school, I was often called dirty Jew. So, but also there were nice people who didn't do that. But I was always positive. I was always proud who I was. And the difference between me and older Holocaust survivors, I was able to obtain an education. When I was older, I was at the age group that was able to obtain an education. So I grew up relying on myself, believing within myself that there were more good people than bad people. And I was always proud, innately proud of who I was as a person when I found out who I was when I was about 9, 10 years old. And that's really, and I stayed always positive. And the secret of being positive is helping other people so that you have no time to discuss your own problems. That's about it.
I turned off my camera instead of unmuting myself. I like that response. Again, people are thanking you for such a powerful presentation and, for your insights. And we did have one question. I just want to signal that it's a big question, and I think it's an important one, and something that you alluded to already, Gershon, as well. Just the parallels. I don't know if you had the chance to see our keynote speaker this morning, who was talking about the treatment of Indigenous children in Canada, and just the parallels that exist between first and second generation Holocaust survivors and the treatment of Indigenous children in Canada, and just kind of any thoughts you had for that. But I did want to preface this by saying we only have about 5 minutes left as well, because I know that that's a big question.
Anybody else wants? Elaine, you want to talk?
That's a really
very
good
loaded.
question.
It's a loaded question.
It's a really loaded question.
Anything that involves children, small children, especially who have been ripped away from their families and are denied to practice their culture and their language, and then neglect created their demise in unmarked graves, of course, it triggers in me every time when I see that. It triggers in me, what are the undercurrent issues? We dress all nicely, and on the other hand, we've got a bigotry hidden somewhere. And from the early century in Canada has come a long way. But there is still a hidden agenda when I talk to people, even towards Indigenous people. Why do they get everything and we don't get anything? Well, sweetheart, you don't get anything because this was their country. That's their ancestors. Not that we came exactly with Mayflower to this country, but those Indigenous people were always here and they have a right to their existence. But when it comes to children, especially in my case, and that's why I feel so much for children, PTSD sets in at any age. And the trauma of this little girl in Texas who had to smear herself with blood of her girlfriend next to her, and the father who in front of Congress cried and said, I haven't got my little girl back. My little girl is gone. This beautiful 10-year-old is gone because of the trauma. We all have trauma, but we are resilient. As children, and I talk about myself as a child, we are resilient, we live in hope, and we can overcome this with love, understanding, and a lot of feeling of safe in a safe environment. I have always very much difficulty when I see the Ukrainian child being placed by a relative on the train while she then goes back to take care of her aging parents. Yes, it breaks my heart to see that, and I'm very vocal about it. So, but my luck was as a small child, and other children were as me a small child, is that I survived. And we are resilient. We may have our problems, but we are willing to overcome, never to forget, and fight against to have it never happen to again. And with the indigenous people in this country, do not ever let this happen again to you. You be proud of who you are, stand up for who you are. Yes, what you are now learning through education, the indigenous people, is to more homogeneity among yourselves, because the homogeneity was not there. It was various tribes. And that's why the Jewish people, although we were also tribal, 12 tribes in history.
I think that's a really good point also, Gershon, because when I, as a young kid, we lived a very insulated life. I mean, Holocaust survivors who came here didn't speak English. So they, we were congregated in a very close, with other Yiddish speaking people. Yeah. So, and nobody had programs and nobody went to school, and we were home till we started public school. And I think at that point is when I started to feel the anti-Semitism, because I didn't know any better, and we weren't exposed to a greater population. We were very insulated. And like you, resilience was always a topic in my family growing up too. And until my parents died and my grandmother passed away, the last thing they all said, the exact same thing as they were actively dying, was save yourself. So, well into their 80s and 90s, and it didn't leave them for 1 second. And, I think that's part of what I inherited. And that's why my overprotectiveness and these things are triggering me today about all these populations and communities.
Absolutely. When my children used to come home after 11 o'clock, I thought that something terrible had happened to them.
Of course.
Because I live still in total angst all the time. Yeah. Still today, I live in angst, because your children, even if when they're 60 years old, they're still your children.
That's right.
Only your children. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I mean, it's so heart touching to hear, your stories of resilience and of hope and compassion and of family strength as well. And family can mean a variety of different things, but it's the people who care for us and who are there for us and support us. And, there's lots of comments coming in that people, haven't either heard from a Holocaust survivor before or understood the experience of a second generation family member before, and the understandings of generational trauma. So people are just very grateful, and thank you for your presentation. And that brings us to the end of the time that we do have today. So I think that everybody else who's commenting as well, that we could be here all afternoon listening and speaking with you. This has been so rich and so insightful, and just so grateful for your time and the generosity of what you shared your stories. And on behalf of the college, I'd like to present Elaine, Anne, and Gershon with a token of our appreciation. And so the college has made a donation to Cafe Europa at Baycrest, and I have been to Cafe Europa. I know what a fantastic program it is and how beneficial it is for the individuals who participate. It's a monthly drop-in program for Holocaust survivors to connect with each other. And so just thank you all very much for being here today and contributing to our discussion.